Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As you can see, Brad's a lot taller than I am. It's wonderful to see so many of you here today for our continuing Distinguished Artist Series. We're very excited about this lecture today because it also represents one of the interesting activities as part of our terrific tertiary partnership with the West Australian Opera. So thank you so much to the West Australian Opera and Carmen who is here somewhere. Thank you so much for allowing us to build this relationship. Brad Cohen is one of the finest minds in opera here in Australia. We're delighted to have him here today. He is, of course, the artistic director of the West Australian Opera. And in that capacity, he's directed Faust, Gianni, Schicchi, the Riders, the Pearl-Fisher's Tosca, Carmen, and the Magic Flute. But before that, he conducted the world premiere of Thomas Adès Powder, Her Face, and has directed in the English National Opera, the New York City Opera, Opera Australia, Opera North, and all sorts of other opera companies in Luzern, and festivals in Edinburgh, in Cheltenham, in Adelaide, in Hong Kong, and the Rossini Festival in Wildbad. Most recently, he's appeared with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra and done Otello with the State Orchestra of South Australia and London's South Bank with the Chelsea Opera Group. So he's a busy man. Fantastic that he's managed to work us into his schedule. And in his spare time, it seems, he's a founder of a London-based group called Tido Music, who are developing a major platform for the digital enjoyment of notated and recorded music. It's fantastic to have him here today. Please welcome Brad Cohen.
Thank you all for those kind words. Good evening, everyone. It's an honour to be here in these august surroundings to deliver this distinguished lecture. I have a confession to make at the outset. This lecture was advertised as being about the Cunning Little Vixen. I will speak to the Cunning Little Vixen, but only at the end. Much like when Wagner was composing The Ring, it became obvious to me as I prepared for this lecture that there was a great deal of back material that had to come first. I'm not going to keep you as long as Rheingold goes on for, but I am going to sketching some of the issues which go into choices around programming. That's the correct slide, that's good. So, the current title of this lecture is now the Operatic Canon and the Cunning Little Vixen. So, first of all, what do I mean by the operatic canon? In common parlance, the canon is something which is a repository of timeless classics. I think that's the cliche about it. So at some stage, a repertoire, whether it's operatic or symphonic or chamber, coheres in some sort of sustainable model which is called the canon. For us, the canon currently is around Verdi, Puccini, Wagner, Mozart. Certain people in the arts industry in Australia are fond of saying that there's been no significant opera written since Turandot. I profoundly disagree with them about that, obviously. Nevertheless, there is a lot of talk about how opera is increasingly museum art. And it's for this reason, of course, that renewing the repertoire and widening the ambit of what we're doing is so important, indeed unavoidable. This presentation is effectively in 4 chapters. I'm going to start with some famous questions about who gets to make the canon, who plays their role. It's not just audiences, of course, it's publishers, impresarios, promoters, and critics. So it's always best to start with some disasters. And fortunately, in the case of opera, there is no shortage of experiences. So my first case study was an opera which was not blessed with the most august premiere. The bass had an accident on stage. These are not always a joke by any means, but in this case it seems that there was something comic about it. This is all God's truth. The cat did not want to the stage and had to be either flung or kicked off. The music was almost inaudible. There was a clap who were outraged at the success of this young composer and did their best to disrupt the evening. And they were, I have to say, extremely successful. Even the costumes are not, for being not believable or not appropriate. It was a terrible night, and this is what the opera composer had to say about it in a letter to his mother. A timeless expression, you might say. Then, as night follows day, the second performance came. The clerk was absent. The bass presumably had something applied to his nose, and the cat was nowhere to be seen. The second night had a great deal more success, and the composer was carried on the shoulders of people through the streets, acknowledged as the new hero. Ensconced in his room, he was called to his balcony for applause from the street, and this is what he said. It was the beginning of a fairly misanthropic, depressive life for this particular composer. I thought about awarding prizes for guessing who it is, but I think at this stage it should be clear. It was Rossini. The opera was Il Barbiere di Siviglia. Let's just reflect on that for a moment. Case study 2. This had a whole different set of challenges. The censors insisted that the historical period was changed from the present day to somewhere in the relatively remote past. As Alexander Paul Smith says in Oxway, the soprano was traditionally built. It wasn't very consonant with the story that she was supposed to be enacting, and that caused some hilarity. The tenor was in poor form, which is an occupational hazard, we all know that. It does happen. Nevertheless, unless they're really ill, the first night has to go on, and often it doesn't do the piece the credit that it deserves. The baritone was extremely annoyed. He'd made his name singing a certain kind of aria, and the composer had not offered him that kind of aria for this role. He was extremely upset. Having said that, the composer himself was not the easiest person to deal with. He publicly remonstrated with the cast at the dress rehearsal. This was something that he was very keen on doing. He did it in multiple operas. He was not a man to be trifled with. He also didn't make many friends at this stage in his career. He really took him to task. So you can imagine it wasn't a very collegiate atmosphere for the first night. This is what the critics had to say about it. Now, from a side perspective, this is very interesting because increasingly, of course, 20th century operas have not been written for singers. They've been written by composers, and singers have been cast in those roles subsequently. In the period to which I refer, the roles were always written for singers, and it was tailored around their voices. Now, in this very respectable critic's view, the composer had failed to do this on this occasion. He hadn't sculpted the piece to the gifts of the artists who he was working with. This is how the composer described the first night. Guess the piece?
Traviata?
Exactly. Again, let's reflect for a moment on what that means. Case 3. The most famous aria in the whole piece was plagiarized, without credit, from another composer. Part of the reason for this was because the soprano had demanded 14 rewrites of the aria. And I think the composer was in some desperation. He wasn't in the best of health. He was clearly running out of time. He needed something. He needed something with local colour, and so he pilfered it. Actually, it worked out fairly well in the long run, I think. He died within a few of the first performances. I think he died after the 5th performance of this piece. And this is what the critics had to say. Fairly harsh words. Perhaps, when you consider the piece itself, not entirely undeserved. The composer felt this. Again, they were very fond of writing to their mothers. Guesses? Absolutely. 3 very instructive episodes from the past. Now, these examples are extremely well known, and we congratulate ourselves on the fact that we value these works correctly. But I want to challenge this complacency about our view of the past and our understanding of the value of art, because we are also in a position of rise. Are we really so much more enlightened? I wonder. Chapter 2. There's a truism, very, very popular amongst struggling artists, that talent will always rise. It's what keeps us going through the hard times. I'm not sure it's true. And part of this lecture is about the vagaries of the canon and the vagaries of historical fortune. Things are so much more random than we can imagine. And I hope that you will leave this evening thinking that things are not by any means a given or certain, and that we all have to play our role in enabling real talent to emerge. So, the vagaries of history and reputation. I want to tell you a little about this composer, Christoph Graupner. He was one of the most respected composers of his day. He also reputedly had the most beautiful hand for notation, so I've concluded a little bit of his name speech for your attention. He worked on the Telemann in Hamburg in the opera. He was at the absolute top of his game, and he was working for the Electro Darmstadt when the board of the Thomas Theatre in Leipzig wanted a successor to someone who'd been there for a long time. Christoph Graupner was their first choice. On hearing this, and when he proposed to the Elector of Darmstadt that he was going to accept this offer, the Elector promptly gave him more musicians and raised his fee because he was so valuable. The disappointed board went with another candidate, who of course was J.S. Bach. But if I may, interrogate your laughter. Is there a reason why Graupner's been forgotten and Bach is seen as the absolute father of music? There is. Graupner was employed by the Elector of Darmstadt. On his death, the Elector said that all of Graupner's works belonged to him as his employer. His sons and family pleaded with the Elector to release his manuscripts, and the Elector refused to do it. So Graupner composed over 1,000 cantatas, over 100 symphonies, and much, much other music, all of it of the absolute highest quality, informed by Italian and French style in a more confident, more elastic way, if that's possible, than J.S. Bach. It's no surprise to me, knowing as much of Graupner's music that I do, that the Electors wanted him in preference to Bach, because he has a beautiful, aerated sense of rhythm and style. It's a delight to listen to. Just before I play you a Gavotte by Graupner, I want to point out the differences with the reception history of Graupner as opposed to Bach. The beautiful thing about the Elector of Darmstadt keeping all of Graupner's music is that the Darmstadt Civic Library now has all of these scores. They've made them all available online, all the facsimiles are available. These pieces are now being increasingly performed and recorded, and it is magnificent music. Bach, as we know, had 20 children, some of whom became extremely important composers, and they advocated tirelessly for his reputation in the years after his death. That's what I mean by the vagaries of history. Why should we patronize Graupner? There's absolutely no reason to. He was a victim of poor fortune and bad luck. And I could go on for considerably longer than Rheingold about all the examples in musical history of exactly this happening. I'm not negating Bach's value, of course, he stands above everyone. But there are many other wonderful composers who have been forgotten. I would say there are many wonderful composers working now who will be forgotten. And what is our responsibility with regard to that? Have a listen to some Graupner. Beautiful music. And it plays the French style with incredible élan and confidence. You can see why this music was desired by the board of Thomas Adès. So that's example one. Example two is someone else who on the Wheel of Fortune is at almost the opposite point, Meyerbeer. Meyerbeer was the greatest opera composer of his period, in universal demand, obsessively envied by the unsuccessful Richard Wagner, who I think had a kind of parasital urge towards Meyerbeer. He wanted the success that Meyerbeer had. He had no idea how to get there. He had a very unhappy time in Paris when all he could see in front of him at the opera was Meyerbeer. Meyerbeer now is almost universally dismissed, and he's a good example of someone who says, well, he was an astute marketer, Jew is always in the background, that kind of comment. And his reputation has now been forgotten because he didn't deserve to be any better. In fact, Meyerbeer is a magnificent opera composer, and I almost made my debut at the Fenice conducting his Crociato in Egitto before Berlusconi took the funding away. That's an unrealised ambition of mine still. But it's a fantastic operatic writing. He deserves his prominence. What I'm trying to begin to paint for you is this endlessly rolling Wheel of Fortune. And it's contingent on our taste and our views of what's important, what's desirable, and what should be dismissed. I'm not going to talk too much more about Meyerbeer, but I think that makes the point for me. The third example is a really interesting one. It's Bizet's Pearlfishers. The image there is of the recording I made with the mic in 2007. Pearlfishers is a very interesting case of a reputation in transition. So Bizet's reputation, of course, stands very high with Carmen, one of the most performed operas in the world, and widely viewed to be one of the most perfect forms of opera. Pearlfishers was always dismissed as an early hack work, which had a stupid story and was a waste of time. I conducted it first in 1995 for Opera North, and had to deal with a terrible edition. And I said whenever I was asked to do it again, I would go back and look at the sources. So I was asked to conduct it in London in 2002, and I was paid the princely sum of £1,000, I think, to create a new edition of Pearlfishers. So I went back to the manuscript in the Bibliothèque Nationale. There was no good edition in existence. I succeeded in identifying the score as Bizet had left it after the first round of 19 performances, not the posthumous vulgarity that was released by his publishers after his death, trying to capitalise on the success of Carmen. So I went back to the original version. That's why my publishers call it an all-text, although I would question whether it really is an all-text since we can't find the manuscript. I performed this in London in 2002, made the edition the same year. Edition Peters, who are my publishers, acquired it. This year, it's been performed at Metropolitan Opera for the second time, and Houston, it's been to Zurich, it's been to Covent Garden, it's been all over the world. I'm proud of that, obviously, but what's interesting is that before the Met did my edition last year, the last person to sing tenor role, indeed the last production of Pearlfishers at the Met was in 1904. And it was Caruso who sang the role of my dear. They had not done Pearlfishers between 1904 and 2016. Now they're already bringing it back for a second season because it was extremely popular, directed by my friend Penny Walcott. This is really instructive because ancillary activities, such as the creation of an edition, can really re-establish a work. Pearlfishers has had performances at houses that did not look at it 15 years ago when I first conducted it. And I'm so proud and touched that I've helped to resurrect Bizet's reputation for this piece. I don't claim any credit apart from bringing it to light. It's done all the rest itself. It's a beautiful piece. The story is stupid, but then so many stories, and I mean that with great respect, because although the stories of many operas are stupid, that's not the point. The point is the emotion and the situations that those stories release, as Verdi always said. It's an extremely beautiful work, and it's magnificently orchestrated. Of course, we did it here last year at West Australia, but also my edition, I'm pleased to say. These 3 points paint different angles on this trajectory of the Wheel of Fortune. reputations do rise and fall. They can be brought back from the dead. And in the world where streaming and assets are so readily available, it's an incredibly exciting time to discover new composers and to discover connections between composers and people that we might not have known about before. My plea really is for us to keep more of an open mind about how we appraise value, whether we are slaves to fashion or whether we have a perspective. You'll see how this eventually leads on to Vixen. So chapter 3, some reflections on my responsibility as an artistic director. These are purely personal, but they come from some extended time of reflection. I'm now 4th season as artistic director. I believe that artistic directors have the primary responsibility of being advocates, because every choice we make in favour of someone or something, whether it's deciding to program a work or deciding to cast an artist, is always a choice against someone else. So everything that we do, every decision we make, is telling one kind of narrative as opposed to another kind of narrative. That for me is the absolute kernel of an artistic director's power, but also our responsibility. And it's what we are judged on. What are the choices we make? Are they defensible? Are they biased? Are they favouritist? Are they merely fashionable? Or do they have a larger trajectory, a larger narrative that they're trying to tell? I hope that you feel, as observers of West Australian opera in the last few years, that we are telling a narrative that's building coherence. But in all of our choices as artistic directors, we advocate the worth, either the worth of an artist or the worth of a piece. And for me, it's very important that this advocacy takes place without undue deference to fashion. Because as we can see, fashion is fleeting. My plea in this lecture, if I have a plea, is that we should always try to interrogate the canon and retain what is good, what is valuable, but not assume that because something is extremely frequently performed, it should stand at the top. The experience of Meyerbeer, of Offenbach, of Gilbert and Sullivan, and many other composers, I would say also of Michael Tippett, shows us how reputations can plummet and rise. Of course, this is the high view of being an artistic director, and that's where I'm most comfortable, in the high view. But we are also impresarios. We are putting shows on season after season, year after year. We are as keen as possible to attract the largest possible paying audience. That's what we do. For me, there's no conflict between those two things, but they do exist alongside each other. If I'm simply an impresario going for footfall, I will program Butterfly interminably until the audience stops coming, and by then it will be far too late. There has to be some leavening of the impresario urge, not the money-making urge as such, but the full house urge. There has to be a sense always, in my view, as an artistic director, of our wider responsibilities. What role am I playing in the history of opera in this state and in this city? What did my predecessors do? What areas did they omit that I can buttress or strengthen? What will be my faults that my predecessor will have to compensate for? These are all very live questions for me, and they're how I make many of my decisions. I'm trying to, within the constraints of having 3 main stage seasons each year, do everything we can to provide a diet that is not only varied, but nourishing, rich, and stimulating. That inevitably involves challenge. So we are custodians of the art form, and we are curators of the seasons and productions that we promote. I believe, and this may be just my temperament speaking, that we also have to have an element of the firebrand about us. There needs to be some small corner of us, which is an Old Testament prophet, saying, this is right, we have to do it. And those risky decisions, calculated risks, not wild risks, have to be an important part of the way in which we approach it. Of course, artistic directors don't get everything they want, and nor should they. But it's always a question of making the best offering we can to you, our audience. There's also an element, I hope, over time, of being in position as an artistic director, that one becomes a guarantor. That is, that the audience and the public increasingly gain trust in our decisions and think, well, if they programmed it, I might not be familiar with it, I might not like it, but I know that it'll be good quality. That's where I'm very keen for us to get to. It takes time, but the most wonderful example of that for me has been Simon Raddle's 17 years at the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra in the 80s and 90s. Simon was there for 18 years, I think, before he went to Berlin. By the end of about his 12th or 13th season, which I was watching very closely as a young student conductor, he was programming Schoenberg, Weyland, and getting full houses, because people trusted his judgment and they knew that the quality would be good. That's my aspiration for our company. Of course, it's challenging for us because we only do 3 main-stage productions a year, so the offering is smaller. There has to be less diversity than across a full symphonic concert program. But nevertheless, that is my aspiration. In effect, it's a contract with audiences. We keep our side of the contract by promoting the best quality, the most interesting repertoire, and the best artists. There are some other agendas that I have about an Australian operatic sensibility I could talk to, but tonight's probably not the time for that. But I hope that this contract with you, our audience, grows over time, and that this environment of mutual trust and reliance can create more diversity in what we're able to program and attract audiences for. The big questions, of course, for any artistic director are, where have we come from? Where are we headed? And most importantly, what is the point of us? Well, the point of West Australian Opera is to serve the state with the very best quality opera we can provide. I also think we have some other responsibilities to nurture the art form, to support women composers, Australian composers, female artists, the indigenous dialogue. There are many, many diverse responsibilities that we have, and it's very hard to satisfy all of those within a 3-season year. But that's where we're headed. Where we're coming from, I have some very important predecessors in this role, and I want to pay tribute to that this time. They have carried the company along with management to where we are now, and I very much relish and respect the fact that I'm only a small part of a longer chain. I look forward to its continuation. So, I think we can feel the approach of Cunning Little Vixen. To be honest, the reason for all this introductory matter, if you like, which is in fact the main body of the lecture, is that I am bored. I've bored myself by my advocacy for Vixen. I hope that many of you have been able to read my blogs. We've been on a massive publicity and marketing push to promote the worth of this work. At the dress rehearsal yesterday afternoon, it was fascinating. I was obviously not conducting, I was standing in the circle, watching the audience, of whom a massive number were children. I was delighted to see. And there was general consternation and confusion, I would say, for the first 10 minutes. The language is unfamiliar. It's not clear exactly what's going on. There are about 7 minutes before anyone sings. And it's confusing, I think. But once the world of Janacek and the beautiful atmosphere of the production took hold, people really got incredibly engaged. So of course, I'm advocating Cunning Little Vixen. I'm obsessed with this piece. I've been obsessed with it for 25 years, since I saw a production at Covent Garden with Sir Thomas Allen and Lillian Watson. Our own Emma Matthews, of course, had great success at Covent Garden in the same production in 2010. Johannes Fritsch, who's conducting, is also obsessed with it. He tells a great story about how he was in the middle of rehearsals 35 years ago for Vixen when he was conscripted into the East German Army. So he has an undischarged debt to this piece. This is his first time conducting it. I still haven't got to conduct it, but I live in hope. It tells, and for those of you who have read my blogs, you'll be familiar with this, it tells a different kind of story in a different kind of way. It's not modernist, it's not recherché, and it's definitely not fashionable. It's truthful, and it's powerful. It goes to the heart of telling stories through the power of the human voice. It doesn't have long arch melodies, Janáček works very much with the naturalness of human declamation, but it offers a new voice to our audiences. We've never had Janáček as part of West Australian Opera's offering in the 51 years we've been alive. It was very important to me that this most, in my view, this most significant operatic composer of the 20th century found a voice through our offering. It increases our range, obviously, it increases our artistic vibrancy, and it diversifies the nature of our offering. But I support it by my advocacy, and I'm very hopeful that through my blog, through promotion and marketing, but also through this lecture, that it gains a place, not necessarily a core place in the canon, but it deserves to be heard. And it, in my view, deserves to be revisited. So I hope that this won't be the only time we present the Cunning Little Vixen, that we're able to bring it back in future years. It's a piece, for those of you who don't know it, which speaks to the human condition in all of its richness, in all of its complexity, and in all of its uncertainty. But it uses animals and the natural world as the vehicle through which the human voice sings. That for me is a beautiful conjunction, because the human voice is expressing the consciousness of non-human beings. This is something entirely new in opera. It's not cutesy, it's not a kid's opera. It's not for families, although families will enjoy it. It's for everyone at whichever part of our lives. It goes the whole gamut from birth to death. And in closing, I want to play you the final scene, which is performed by Sir Thomas Adès. Just before I get to that, if I just ask you to throw your minds back to the earlier examples of the vagaries of reputation and outcycles, there are a few reasons for why Janáček finds difficulty in establishing his place in the canon, I think. This is actually a seriously significant point. If you can't pronounce a name, you feel immediately disempowered and inadequate for it. Just for clarity, it's pronounced Janáček. But those accents confuse people. It's a great shame. He wrote in the minority language Czech. Of course, we're doing it in English, but that is also an obstacle. He lived in relative obscurity, composed his operas late, in his 60s and 70s primarily, was almost universally unrecognised, and then garnered with many, many honours in his 70s and 80s. But he was outside the mainstream. He didn't have an agent, he didn't have advocates, he didn't have a publicity machine. He was also not a member of a club or school. His language and his sensibility are absolutely sui generis. He's been incredibly influential on 20th century composers, including Jonathan Dove, Philip Glass, John Adams, but he didn't have any immediate successors. In fact, it's really interesting that the novelist Milan Kundera is the son of the principal Janáček, Czech-speaking specialist. So there's a real sensibility in the Czech Republic about the importance of Janáček. Having said that, I've spoken to the orchestra in Brno, which is Janáček's hometown, and it doesn't attract full houses there currently either. This is how reputations become in peril. What I want to point out about all of these elements is that they are all external. They relate to external, extrinsic aspects. They're not about the power of the music, about its sensibility, about the stories it tells, about its magnificent richness. But they all serve as slight impediments to its acceptability. I hope that gives us pause for thought. Everything Janáček does is so vibrant, filled with profound humanity, and I'm reminded of Jane Austen writing about her novels, that she crafted a whole world on a small piece of ivory. In a way, Cunning Little Vixen is a little like that. Trudy Dalglish, the wonderful lighting designer, said to me the other day, yeah, it's a lovely little piece, and I said, it's not a little piece. And she knows that, of course. But it's easy to mistake the power and the immediacy of Cunning Little Vixen because of its setting. It seems rather anodyne and friendly. There's so much more going on than that. So let's hear the final scene. Just to leave you with our motto, is not company. For me, Janacek completely fulfills this. This is the forester speaking about regret, the end of life, and nature.
Spring is here at last, good to see the trees green again. Makes a man wonder at it, and I'm no younger. Is it true or just a story? Or just a story? How many years have passed since two young lovers walked here in springtime? She like a silver fair, he a dark-leafed pine. When they went mushroom gathering, they would leave the best or trample on them, all because they could not see. They were so deeply in love. But the kisses then, oh, the kisses that those lovers gathered. We were young and newly married. God, yes, we were young and newly married. Without the flies, a man could fall asleep in seconds. When evening arrives, I welcome the rays of the setting sun.
the wonderful Tom Allen, with the orchestra of Covent Garden, conducted by Simon Ashley. Thank you very much for your attention. We've got time, so I'm very happy to take anyone's questions if there are any.
About that, Rossini. You mentioned the power that sort of artistic directors have to curate the sort of cultural interests in the wider society. What do you feel that WA Opera is doing to promote an Australian cultural product? And further to that, what is WA Opera doing apart from the other operas, the Australian opera companies, to promote something that's West Australian?
Yeah, very good question. If everyone didn't hear that, what's WA doing to curate a distinctively WA operatic sensibility? So I have a document that I've circulated to various bodies and people over the past couple of years, and this is a longer-term project, of course. The immediate thing I did in my first season of programming was, of course, Tim Winton's Ian Grandridge's The Riders, which was about as West Australian a piece as you can possibly get, with largely West Australian singers. But all of this goes to my views about developing what I think is really needed. Has been the case under Moffat Oxenbould when he was Artistic Director of Opera Australia, is to continue to develop an Australian operatic sensibility. For me, this has three pillars. The first is to commission and perform new Australian works. There are things that I can't divulge at this point, but that's a clear part of our future plans. In pragmatic terms, not just in wishing. The second is to filter the canon, as we call it, the core repertoire, to an Australian sensibility. And in terms of my achievement of that kind of objective, Simon Phillips' production of The Elixir of Love is an excellent example. Profoundly Australian, profoundly true. The third pillar is maintaining and developing sustainable careers for Australian artists. This is something that I think is a particular responsibility, and the way that we're achieving that at West Australian Opera is that we have an extremely robust, explicit casting policy. I will always cast West Australian artists first. Then I will cast Australians, then I will cast internationals. Last year, in the 2017 season, we didn't have a single international artist. And I should emphasise that this is at no sacrifice of quality. All of you know the incredible wealth of talent we have here. I have to do better through working with more WA directors and composers continuously, but singers was the most achievable, quick way to start this. Of course, I'm not the first person in this position at West Australian Opera to advocate local casting. It has a very, very strong tradition, but I'm proud to carry that forward. I hope that answers some of your question. Alex.
Hi, Brad. Thank you for a fantastic talk. And I was just wondering how we could look forward, or could we look forward, to having a complementary large opera theatre, a grand opera theatre capable of staging, for example, Tristan and Isolde, which has been done in the Madge already with, who was our conductor for that? No, it wasn't Richard Mills. It was going to be, actually. Lionel Friend conducted that. I just wonder if we have a wonderful new football stadium, but do you think we could generate enough artistic vibrancy in this state to even consider a complementary? I'm not saying instead of the Madge, because I think the Madge is a beautiful theatre. It's charming, it's delightful. It has so many things about it, but one that could be possible to stage both musicals and opera. Is there a place for that in this state?
Well, thank you. My views on this might surprise you. I'm an enormous fan of the Madge, and when my duties take me abroad, I've just been with Scottish Opera conducting Ariadne of Naxos with Tom Allen, which finished last weekend. I am so grateful for the match every time I come back. It's not only beautiful theatre, but it has this capacious pit. Yes, it's small, but the problems I observe for many of the other major companies in Australia is that they don't have the right size theatres. Brisbane, Adelaide, Melbourne all have massive stages, massive pits, and they have to populate those stages where possible with voices that are large enough for them without amplification. I believe the Madge is just about perfect for what this company needs to do and can do. As you say, Tristan has been performed there. I am not an advocate for another lyric theatre currently, because I think we have a treasure right in the centre of town, and I am more than content with it. That might surprise you. Also, I don't feel a particular responsibility to provide a venue for musicals. That's just me.
Thank you for the talk and for bringing Gianni with a reasonably cheerful opera, nice training. As a person who deals more with language than music, I'm curious whether your experiences of the opera included the original, obviously minority language on global scale, but on the other hand, if I gather correctly that the wonderful production you have now was premiered last year in Melbourne, would you like to indicate how collaboration among states helps lead to what you so wisely have described to us?
That's a very germane point, and there are many detailed discussions going on at the moment. As you know, the wonderful Stuart Maunder is now ensconced in Adelaide as the new artistic director of SOSA, and Patrick Nolan has just taken over at Opera Queensland, so I'm long in the tooth at this point. They're both excellent collaborators, and I feel profound sympathy with both of their artistic aims. Definitely, we are looking actively at collaborations, and there are things that I certainly cannot announce this evening, but it will come to pass almost certainly next year, in our 2019 season, involving collaborations. We're a small company. We need to co-produce. We're not suddenly going to start doing our own ring. That would be unwise. However, as you will have discerned, it's core to my perspective that we continue to enlarge the repertoire, to refresh it. And the only way we can do that is through new productions. We cannot repeat the same productions over decades without some injury to our artistic vibrancy. It's important that we signal as a company that we ourselves are in the process of constant renewal and that we're not a museum culture. So yes, collaborations are a very interesting, exciting and real situation going forward. I'm happy to announce. I'm sorry, I can't say it left the wall. Mr. Millier.
Look, just another question about Vixen. I thoroughly enjoyed preparing this production with Maestro Fritsch. It's been a gorgeous journey. And there's moments when it feels as though we're in Siegfried's forest, you know, from the Ring. I allude to Wagner a lot. Was Janacek ever exposed to Wagner's music, or was he influenced by it in any way?
He was well versed. So he ran the organ school in Brno, which was really like the conservatory in Brno for many decades. Lived in an amazing little garden hut in the grounds of the organ school. You can imagine I'm a fan, so I've been there. In fact, it was incredible because I conducted from the house of the English National Opera, and I told the librarian that I had conducted that, and she said, "Oh, here's the manuscript." Gave me his manuscript and walked out of the room, which was an astonishing experience. So he was extreme, as an educator, as a teacher, he was incredibly literate, and he taught counterpoint. He was very keen on counterpoint. And of course he knew all the Wagner operas intimately. You're right about the echoes of Siegfried, and Johannes was talking yesterday about a Leonhard Kalman moment. All of these influences are there, but of course the value of a composer is not who they sound like, but how they make it their own. And I think you would agree he makes it all profoundly distinctive, even though it might sound on occasion like Wagner or Lear and Carmen. It's all Janacek. But yes, he's a very, very widely read person. It's just that he lived in obscurity. He wasn't a shepherd living in the forest. He was extremely cultivated, but unrecognised.
I noticed we're working with the Sir Charles Mackerras score. Sir Charles was a great champion of Janacek's music. Did you have anything to do with him?
I did. Of course, Charlie was incredibly important for all Australian musicians working abroad. And I, of course, spoke to him about Janacek, and I used to go and watch a lot of his rehearsals in London. He was always extremely courteous, lovely to me, very, very kind. And of course, we worshipped him. Actually, there's a funny story about him, because when I was a schoolboy in Sydney, I worked as a music copyist for the ABC, which is how I supported myself through my conducting studies in England as well, and became a music copyist for the BBC. I was Charlie's preferred music copyist at the age of 15, which was an incredible thing. So when he came to Australia with a score of a Handel oratorio, I was the one who was tasked with copying out the cadenzas. Unfortunately, one day I lost his score at the Sydney Post Office. And for a 15-year-old, that was a terrifying half hour. Fortunately, it was found again, but I don't think he ever knew about that happening. It's just a horrible story. So yes, he goes right back to the beginning for me. And I think part of my openness to Janacek is because I knew that he was so important to Mackerras. So he really has served as a beacon for the promulgation of Janacek in our culture, particularly in Australia. You'll remember the marvellous David Stanhope conducted cycle that Opera Australia did about 10 or 15 years ago. I saw most of them. Janacek has a real tradition in Australia because I think it's outside the centre, it's very direct, it's expressive, and it doesn't muck about. I think there are lots of similarities in some ways between Czech and Australian culture, and I think that's why it finds a resonance for us.
Okay. May I just ask you a general question? Because there's so many students here this evening. What type of advice can you give to young musicians that are aspiring?
I'm very wary of offering advice. I think advice is overrated. All I can say is that the beacons for me as a performer and as a human being are always to try and find your path, and if you don't find it, to believe that at some stage you may happen upon it by chance. But when you found your path, to keep at it. I don't believe in keeping on at things at all costs. One day I'm going to make it. I think that's a really injurious wisdom to offer to the young. Because, as part of my talk illustrates, failure is all around us. And sometimes there's a time to say, I'm done. Actually, I'd rather do something else. I'm not one of those people who encourages everyone to go into the performing arts. In fact, most of my philosophy is about doing my best to discourage anyone, because I know that the ones who will not be put off are the ones who literally are not prepared to do anything else. And they're the ones who often will succeed. Not necessarily through talent, just through sheer determination. So I'm not a great one for the nostrums, but there's something profoundly true about being able to find a path that can carry you through life, whether it's family, love, career, Janacek, it doesn't really matter what. But we find something that resonates. It's like a child discovering an instrument. A child will play the flute and know that that is their instrument. Well, I think we all know in this room that sense of recognition, whether it's recognition in a person or in a path. And it comes at all parts of our life. And it may not be where you're looking for it. I can't do any better than that.
Thank you very much, Greg. So my Janacek story is that I played Janacek's Sinfonietta, was the first professional piece I ever played with the West Australian Symphony Orchestra about 2 million years ago. And what I remember about it, the conductor was Albert Rosen, and for some reason the ABC cameras were in. The orchestra was still an ABC orchestra back then, making a special about Albert Rosen. I've never played with an orchestra before. And I've played with bands all my life in the euphonic playing. And of course, with band conducting, when the conductor's baton reaches there, you start playing. Albert Rosen was definitely not one of those conductors. So he gave the downbeat, and he reached there, and I played, and I was a second ahead of the rest of the orchestra. Early enough for him to stop before anyone else played. And there was a camera between me and him, and he just stopped and he said, "That camera must be in today. Where's the camera?" So I didn't actually play the first note the second time. And it's amazing listening to this and in the Sinfonietta and hear the intricate writing, isn't it? The intricate woodwind writing. But see, you must be having a ball, Alex.
Oh, yeah.
In the middle of the score, just these gorgeous colours that are developing all the way around his writing. So amazing work. Thank you so much for a wonderful speech tonight, for a wonderful lecture. I think we've all learned a great deal tonight, not least of which we should all come on and hear the performance of the Western Opera in the coming week. I'm sure it's going to be amazing. Thank you so much.